Hello, everyone. Brian Beck here, author of Billion Dollar B2B E-commerce. I am thrilled to welcome you to session 5 of our virtual book tour. I wrote this book to give B2B companies a roadmap to their own digital transformation, and I'm excited to share it with the market. You can find out more about the book here on this website, billiondollarb2becommerce.com. And the book is now available on Amazon.com in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. Before we go much further, I want to thank our sponsors, particularly our platinum sponsor, ElasticPath, for this virtual book tour. So we're well along our way in our virtual book tour. We're covering all the concepts in the book and breaking them down. I've got 12 chapters in the book and a lot of content in there. And we're interviewing practitioners. All of our sessions will be aired at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and are available on demand after the initial airing. Our first 4 sessions are now available: leadership and alignment through organizational evolution. And today we're talking about aligning selling channels. We've got 3 more sessions after this: digital marketing, online experience, and our digital future. So I hope you join us for the remainder of our sessions as well. Today, we're going to be talking about aligning selling channels and managing channel conflict. These are chapters 5 and 6 in Billion Dollar B2B E-commerce. We have a lot of good content in here to cover. And what I'm going to do today is start with some context around the concepts. Now, I can't share everything, obviously, that's in the book. You don't have time, but so you have to get the book to read everything. But I want to give us some context. And then I'm really excited. We have Shalin Shah, who was recently with Georgia Pacific and has a long career. They're really dealing with some of these issues we're going to be sharing in just a minute. And Jamus Driscoll from ElasticPath is also on our session today. So I'm excited to dive in on that, and we'll take some some back and forth and have a little bit of a fireside chat as we go through. So let me start with some context. So this is what the traditional value chain looks like. You know, for hundreds of years, many B2B companies have sold the same way, where they make a product, manufacturer, and sell that to an offline distributor or retailer or other type of reseller, a dealer perhaps. And then that reseller then sells it to the end user or the buyer of the product. And this is how the business worked for a long time. There was clear value added at each step, and really a lot of the control of the end customer's use of the product, perception of the product, and how it compared to other products was controlled really by the middle of this screen here, the offline distributor. But the world has changed. Buying and influence channels have changed and are now heavily digitized. Up to 90% of the buying process is done online. Research is done online today. And so the product manufacturer today is often now selling direct to the end customer, that person who uses the product in the field. And the center has also evolved. You've got distributors and resellers that have become digitized. They have their own e-commerce channels and other digital channels. You have e-commerce pure play resellers that have emerged. Think about the Zorro division of Grainger and other pure play e-commerce players. And then you've also got marketplaces playing a huge role. These are Amazon, but it's also other companies that are selling product that are vertical specific marketplaces. I have a number of them profiled in the book as well. What really this is telling us, though, is that the buyer or the end user in this world has more power than ever before, not only to see product information, they have multiple buying options and paths. They're more informed. They can see pricing more easily. There's more transparency. I tell a story in the book about how the auto industry, for example, has evolved over the last 20 years. Think about your process of buying a car these days, right? You go online, you research the product, you research the car, you are more informed with both the information about those vehicles, how it compares to others, and the pricing, and you have many different ways to buy. And that has forced the product dealers, the auto dealers, to change how they're delivering value to that customer. Those same dynamics are coming to B2B in different industries. It has changed the margin profile for the auto dealer as well. They make less on selling the product, the car, than they do on other things like warranties and service. I think Jeff Bezos, who is the founder of CEO of Amazon, says this really well. he has this quote, and I love this quote. I use it all the time. Back in 2010, he said, "The balance of power is shifting towards buyers and away from companies. The right way to respond to this, if you are a company, is to put the vast majority of your energy, attention, and dollars into building a great product or service and putting a smaller amount into shouting about it or marketing it." So when you think about how channels are evolving and how you need to align them, this is an approach that I think bears reflecting on for all of our B2B folks in the audience. How does that ultimate customer make their decision about your product? And if you're a distributor, you're sitting in the middle of that, you've got to make sure you're adding value to the end customer in ways that go beyond just price and selection. Because guess who does that better than anybody? It's that guy, right? Amazon.com. Is this death of a salesman? It's a few years ago, Forrester came out with a report. The fellow who wrote the foreword in my book, Andy Hoare, and he said, hey, he proposed, hey, this is the death of a salesman. He was actually not saying that. What he was saying really was that this is the evolution of the traditional selling channel, an evolution of how the internal sales teams can become more effective. And it's a leveling up too, right? Because if your sales force is just selling based on price and relationship, that's going to, their role has now expanded and has become more strategic and has been leveled out by digital. And I believe, and we see this in practice, that digital transformation doesn't replace effective account management. It actually enhances its effectiveness. And it empowers the relationship. It allows customers to browse, obtain support, and purchase at their own convenience. And that allows the B2B selling teams to focus on building customer relationships, new customer acquisition, becoming more strategic. It also allows sellers, whether you're a distributor or manufacturer, to more profitably sell to smaller customers through e-commerce. You can expand your reach while also potentially commissioning your sales team on the sales that are generated through e-commerce. You can also credit your dealers and third-party channels. So there's ways to, and we'll talk about this with Shalin, there's ways to align your channels around these things that avoid channel conflict. And also self-service. It frees reps to be more focused on things that matter for their function and not, where's my order? You go online to do those things. So what is channel conflict? The internet authority on everything, Wikipedia, puts it this way. Channel conflict occurs when manufacturers, brands disintermediate their channel partners, such as distributors, retailers, dealers, and sales representatives, by selling their products directly to buyers through general marketing methods and or over the internet. I think this is fine, but I think the definition actually needs to evolve, and this is straight out of the book. Channel conflict, in my opinion, is actually really applies to all levels of the chain that I shared earlier. So I define it this way. Channel conflict occurs when any participant in the value chain disintermediates any portion of the value chain, including manufacturers, brands, distributors, et cetera, et cetera. What I add to this is manufacturers and brands, because if I look at some of the distributors that I work with, and some very large, some mid-market, they are buying suppliers, they are launching private labels, they are going backwards in the supply chain. So it's not just about manufacturers having all the power to go to the end customer and selling. It's also about the distributors and resellers themselves competing for that end buyer's dollars with their own products, because they realize that there's more margin and more differentiation longer term by meeting those customers' needs at the end of the day. So this is a very fast moving and changing world we're dealing with. We'll talk about this with Shalin. So before we get into our fireside chat, I just wanted to share a few things about some approaches to managing channel conflict and some of the dynamics. So you see that these channels can compete for the same ultimate buyer's dollars, and that's really the source of potential conflict. And when you think about the internal conflict, your sales team and e-commerce, and again, conflict, I think in many ways is more of a perception than a reality. But when you think about what could cause it, or what is the sales force, for example, thinking about, it's about relationship ownership, it's about commission, it's about pricing, it's about things that are related to that, the relationship and the fear that will be taken away from the internal sales team. And the external conflict is often centered on price. So you think about the manufacturer selling direct, you pick up all that retail margin, oh my goodness, you have pricing power, right? But there are paths to manage that. So what I always tell companies is it's important to understand the ultimate customer, the user of the product, and the path with which companies, your products take to get to that customer, and the value at each step of that distribution process, the supply chain. You want to define your selling channel mix and the value of each channel and what it does best. And I say be realistic about it, because this is a confront the brutal reality situation, if I coin Jim Collins, from good to great. You got to confront what's happening in your market, understand that it's digitized, but that ultimate buyer has more power than ever before. So you need to understand them. And there's no single right answer here. Remember, the ultimate buyer is in charge. So you all have met me. I'm Brian. I'm the author of this book. And I'm also the managing partner of a company called Incentivizing. We help companies manage their Amazon programs and particularly focus on B2B e-commerce. I also do strategic advisory consulting with my firm, Beck eCommerce. So I am thrilled to be joined today by Shalin Shah. Shalin is formerly with Georgia Pacific, has a long career there, and I want to welcome him. And Shalin, you want to say hello to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Shalin Shah. Really nice to meet you. Looking forward to chatting with you today about a topic dear to my heart on B2B e-commerce and channel conflict.
Awesome. Thanks, Shalin. And Jamus, welcome back. You were at our last session, and thrilled to have you. We had a great conversation last time with Pella, and we're going to have another great one today. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to our session today, too, as much as a listener, as a participant. So I'm Jamus Driscoll, Executive VP at ElastiPath, and I've been in the e-commerce world and retail tech world for close on now 20 years. Seen a lot of permutations and a lot of changes in the marketplace, and certainly believe that we're at the next step of one of the great changes that's going to shape the industry.
No doubt, no doubt. So I'm thrilled to have both of you guys. So Shalin, tell us, a lot of folks use GP products, Georgia Pacific products, every single day, businesses and consumers. And they may not realize it. And a lot of people are familiar with GP, but some aren't. So please tell us more about, the company, and then also your role within the company.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think everyone's either touched or seen Georgia Pacific, hopefully somewhere in the U.S. So Georgia Pacific, real quick, 3 business units really thinking about. One is building products. So any kind of building that gets built, there's all the products that go into that construction. The one, consumer products, which is the business unit that I was in, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the third one is, packaging and corrugated. So think about anything, any package that anything can come in, we build all that stuff. And so I was in the consumer products division. And so we would sell paper towel dispensers and soap dispensers and toilet paper dispensers into buildings. So we making sure everyone stays clean and things like that. So hospitals, airports, office buildings, hospitals, all those types of things. And so that was a business unit that I was in, and I was responsible for e-commerce and marketing strategy.
I'll have to ask you about the great toilet paper crisis that happened earlier this year with the whole COVID-19 thing.
Yes.
Apparently the world can't keep up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
demand changes very quickly.
Yeah. So, particularly in a pandemic. Right?
Yes, particularly. But the cool part was I saw our pro products sitting on a public shelf. So there's channel conflict right there.
There you go.
Chase it out the system and figure out how that happened. It's interesting to hear about the evolution of a business that's as widely, diverse as yours, right? From building products to consumer to packaging. And you've obviously, the company has been around for a long, long time, been incredibly successful, 30,000 employees plus, phenomenal story. I guess the question would be, how did it get to that type of growth? And, prior to the world of digital, which believe it or not existed at one point in time, what were the primary channels to market and ways that it was thought about selling?
Yeah, no, good question. I mean, so Georgia Pacific, really the primary channel is one, there was actually a lot of acquisitions that were made in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, either acquisitions of companies or acquisitions of capital assets. And so the reason I give you that background is that kind of created the different routes to market. And the routes to market were primarily through resellers, right? So the way Brian just outlined it. And so it was, hey, we're going to get you the best product we can very quickly. And then surrounding those resellers with lots of services. I mean, that was pretty much the primary way that GP really grew, was having really strong products with the right services and getting it there on time, right? Across all 3 of those things. And so if you think about it, anything you can make out of a tree, we basically make, and we make sure that we can get it to them really quickly. And so that was a primary growth channel.
I see. So predominantly sort of its roots were focusing in on getting as many marketable assets out of the tree as possible, and then reliant on a reseller channel to reach those three major distribution or those three major markets around, consumers and packaging and the building materials.
Yeah, correct. Right. Because I mean, we had a large manufacturing network, and then we built out the distribution network to get it out. But if you think about getting to a construction site, getting to a building, getting to somebody's home, getting to factories or wherever, we needed the resellers to do that and get the services and all those
That's
things.
interesting.
So that's where you guys started, Shalin. You had this. So it really is like I described earlier in the slides, where you had that sort of flat distribution structure, right? And then the world started changing, right? You worked there 10 years, right? You were in
10
charge
years,
of the digital for this particular e-com,
Mhm.
right? For this particular category you're in. What was that journey like? Where did you start when you joined a decade ago? Where'd you end up? Tell us about that whole digital transformation journey, and then we'll get into some of the things you saw along the way.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So, when I joined, it was a lot of the selling was obviously done through resellers and things. And so and then the second thing was a lot of our marketing was traditional marketing methods, television on the retail side, trade shows, sell sheets, dinners, that type things. And so when we put it together, we said, look, we're going to put a business case together that says, we believe our fair share online with somebody by the name of maybe Amazon or others is not what it is offline. And so we actually made a bet that, hey, the business case bet is we think we can grow online faster, and we put reasons as to why. And then we also said, but it's going to be joint with marketing because we want to shift our offline marketing spend to digital spend. And we actually put a business case together that said we think we're going to get a higher ROI because we can measure it. And so the transition made sense, from a business case level. To your point, it just took a long time to kind of get the change going. I mean, I still remember, calling on Amazon. It was a third-party broker with my head of sales, and it was like $99,000 of business. And I think the vendor manager was like, "Why? What are you doing here?" But the journey evolved pretty quickly, actually, from there to, hey, we can do things differently. How do we get improvement in where things are going? We kind of took a challenger mentality as well. Like, hey, we can do things differently that we couldn't do elsewhere. And same, when we started calling them with Grainger and Staples, what we wanted to do, the journey evolved more to, hey, look, we know you like our products and kind of the services we have wrapped around our field sales team. We want to make sure we have all those same services wrapped around our digital components. So we then started to invest in data and product content and in search terms, and then we invested in assortment, then we invested in merchandising, then we invested in supply chain. So we kind of took what I call like a Lego block approach almost, and kind of built from there to the point now, where several $100 million of e-com sales through the resellers. There's now e-com sales that are direct to certain customers that want it, that need it, and we'll talk through some of that as well. And we now have marketing tied in with the sales, so we can go do some of these kind of digital demand generation activities tied in with that as well, that we weren't able to do as well before. So pretty long journey.
So I know it was a decade, right? So and GP is not a small company, but a lot of the folks listening to this series are not, they're larger companies and they want to transform, which is why they're interested in this topic, right?
Yeah.
So you guys ended up really where, that thing I showed earlier, where you had all these channels, they're digitally enabled, you're selling direct, you got resellers selling direct, you got retailers selling direct, you got distributors selling through their e-commerce, right? So it really was, and I know Amazon. So what role did that end customer play? What role did the what I call the ultimate customer in the book, the user of the product, play in that journey? And as you need those moves.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And so, one of the things that we looked at was we kind of did like a table or a matrix. So if you think about it, the columns on the top were, what are the different types of end users? So vertical segments, right? So in a healthcare or a food service or et cetera, et cetera. And then the horizontals are the ones you kind of laid out. These are the resellers, marketplaces, et cetera. And then in the box, we kind of said, who is the type of end user that's most likely going to go buy from here, right? And that was pretty helpful, because then what that end user is kind of dictating, what you talk about, is the end user is then dictating what information do they need, what products do they need, and as well, what services do they need. And so you'd have to find commonality, otherwise you couldn't make money. But then you also had to find the nuances where you thought there might be some growth. And so, one example for us is there was big segment of the small and medium business kind of end users that we didn't have a very good way to reach with how we traditionally went to market. And there were some of those boxes that we highlighted in green that said, wow, we can really go after small and medium businesses. And we went after them that way. So,
yeah.
Just in listening to you also about the number of different ways that you can go to market and the traditional ways in which you've gone to market, there's a role for the rep really in making sure that the value prop is being nuanced to almost each and every buyer, I presume. Which I think, as you imagine, you explained this well in the Matrix, but even as you're attempting to move over into e-commerce, there is the chance maybe that you're disintermediating that sort of value connection that happens right at the last mile. And then how did you guys think about that? I mean, what was the approach that you took maybe to figure out the right way to manage the user experience such that, and to do so in conjunction with your selling partners in a way that was going to have the most effect for you?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. And to be honest, we struggled with it for a little while. It wasn't easy, right? I mean, even just to the simple thing of what do you write in the bullet on a product detail page? Because, we're used to saying, hey, the paper towel dispenser's system gives you this benefit in a restaurant, but the benefit's very different in an office building.
Right.
And so, but guess what? You only have one detail page on a reseller, and they're all coming in. And so, but we've found ways to add all that verbiage into the product content and copy. The other thing that we learned along the way was we made some decisions on which systems of products we did not think were going to be really self-serve and which ones were going to almost always be assisted selling, if that made sense, right? And so we changed how we did the product content, the visuals, the search terms, etc., and even the types of PDFs and spec sheets we would put on it if we felt like it was something that the seller was going to actually sell or the distribution rep would sell on our behalf, versus a end user might come directly on the reseller site and self-serve and get it done. And so we tailored our content and our assortment kind of along those. And once we were able to do that, that was actually super helpful. Because then we were enabling the sales reps in two-way. One, if they had an account and there was these long tail items, they didn't have time to sell, but they were getting credit for the sale. Or second, the stuff that they spend time talking about in the consultative sale that Brian talks about, hey, now they have more time to talk with a consultative sale, but they have like a guide or a tool to remember all the information when they need it. And they can kind of close those sales a little bit.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it sounds, if I'm understanding this correctly, you almost took a hierarchical approach or a category-based approach to the products and said, which is most likely to be a direct sale, which is likely to be a facilitated sale, and then set up the e-com experience in a way to facilitate one of those two different paths.
Yes, you got it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a great framework to think through it, Shalin. It's awesome. So I'm sure the folks listening will appreciate that. So oftentimes when I'm talking to B2B folks, executives at B2B firms, particularly if they're a manufacturer like GP is, well, really any of them, but they're worried about this, about channel conflict. If I launch e-commerce, or if I enable these channels, or if I sell on Amazon, or I'm going to, my dealers, my distributors, my retailers are going to freak out and they're going to stop buying from me, and no more orders from Home Depot for you.
Right.
Or whatever, you know what I'm saying, or Henry Schein or Grainger.
Yeah,
or
they're all gone, right?
They're all gone. My business is gone, right? And I know, I lived consumer side of e-commerce for 18 years almost, and saw that evolution happen in consumer. But I mean, you live this in B2B. What's bigger? Is it the perception or is it the reality? I mean, when you guys started going into this and saw these changes, I mean, what did all your channels just suddenly stop buying from you because you have an e-commerce site?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I will tell you my experience, it was perception versus reality, right? And so can I give you a little bit of a story, right? So, I mean, two of them. One, you mentioned, one, when we were starting to bring on Amazon, have that relationship up and coming, that's channel conflict, which is no different than other channels kind of coming on. When we did our own site, there was a lot of internal concern. Every customer is going to be upset. They're never going to do business with us. They're going to take everything away. And so one of the things we actually did in listening, and that was months and months of these conversations, which were adequate. I mean, people needed to understand what we were trying to do. And so we then find, okay, well, let's go talk to the customers directly. So we went and talked to 16 of our, most strategic, thoughtful resell partners and customers of all different sizes, right? The national $40 billion resellers, to the smaller ones, and to a T, all of them said, yeah, you should do this. Can you make sure you share your learnings with us, right? And let's make sure we're going on round. And so, I think it was I say perception versus reality, because when you explain who you're going after, what you're actually trying to accomplish, and how that benefits the joint business, it makes almost all sense. I mean, we had one customer obviously that made a lot of noise after we launched it. And it's like, because there was a promotion we ran on a product, but we managed it, right? We explained to him what we were doing, how that was going to work, how that didn't destroy any part of their business. And we went from there, and data won the way, right? That reseller was not selling any of the products that we were promoting, which is why we were promoting it. And so for me, the perception was way overdone versus what the reality of the situation was.
You just touched on something really important, which is you segmented the assortment. You looked at the product lines, you said, and so you thought about that strategically as it relates to the channels, right? And I think that's an important takeaway. So that's a fantastic example. So that's kind of the external side. Let's talk about a minute about the internal piece, right? So the other part of conflict I highlighted earlier was the death of a salesman, right?
Right.
And you and Jamus were just talking about this a little bit. How did you guys align the internal sales team? What kinds of things did you incentivize the sales team? Did you align them with commissions on e-com sales, and what kinds of things? Tell us, take us down a little bit into more detail around how you aligned internally these different selling channels.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, I mean, first and foremost, I actually sat on the senior sales leadership team. So my boss was the head of sales, and so there was shared incentive number one, which is, hey, I got to make sure I'm doing whatever.
Happy.
Yeah, I got to keep the boss happy, right, and keep my peers happy. Otherwise, you can't do it.
That's interesting.
And then, but it does actually create a very different, I think, MO, right? Because it's like, hey, you're in the boat with us. We're gonna build this boat together, and so let's figure out how to make all those things happen. So it does actually create, I think, a nice forcing mechanism. The other thing, a couple other things that we did is, when the sales leaders that kind of had account ownership for some of our resellers, right? They still own the overall customer relationship. They own the entire customer strategy. All we would just say is, well, what part of your customer strategy is e-commerce going to be there? We just said, look, we got to make sure if they have an e-commerce platform or are going to, how is that going to play into what our overall customer strategy is with them? So I would have responsibility for the overall e-commerce strategy. They would have responsibility for the customer strategies, like you mentioned earlier, Grainger and Zorro. So someone would have the Grainger strategy and the Zorro, but I'd have the e-com that fits in with it, right? And that was a forced tension, but it was good, right? And then same, we would also have shared, to your point on incentives, we'd have shared objectives, right? So if we need to sell this much through Staples or this much through Henry Schein, here's how much we think we want to sell on e-commerce through them or on our own, right? And then the part that we did on our own, which was helpful on the incentives, we just said, look, you have a target on what you need to go hit in terms of number of dispensers placed or new product rollout or whatnot. As long as you hit those and you're using the e-commerce site, great. And then my profitability was based on, is that a profitable sale or not? We didn't hold them accountable for that because we want to just make sure we're getting the tools to help either enable them, or if it was a self-service sale, that would get, depending on where the lead came in from as well. So that's kind of how we shared through that. I mean, and then the other piece, on the sales part that helped a lot is we put some expectations and responsibilities, what we call them at Georgia Pacific, into the supply chain and marketing teams as well. And so that actually helped quite a bit, because now you had the entire customer team really having shared responsibilities across all of those, because sometimes the e-commerce would have a different marketing need or a different supply chain need as well.
We talked a little bit about channel conflict almost from the point of view of the rep, or the selling channel. But it seems like you had a very robust and mature distribution mechanism, right, from product conception through to ultimately getting in the hands of the consumer. And certainly the sales team is a component of that. I'd be curious to know, in that evolution, did you run into other points of conflict, things that suddenly created, contention that maybe you didn't anticipate on the way in?
Yes. We all learned something, right?
Yeah, right.
So one of the things that I learned was, so we have a commercial ops and sales operations team, right? That really looks
Hmm.
at all the pricing deals and helps with the annual negotiation programs with channel partners and resellers and things. And one of the contingent points was, if we were selling through e-commerce or wanting to do, marketing in e-commerce or spend time or resources in e-commerce, it didn't really fit the bill of, fitting into the existing tool set and processes of how we looked at those operations, right?
Right.
And so that took, quite a bit of one, learning on me on how the heck we do this internally, and then two, how the heck is that going to work in a digital world? Because
Right.
the outcome still needs to be there. We need to make sure we're profitable on both sides, mutual value, but it's going to be done in a different way. And so that was probably one of the bigger, unexpected ones, because sales and sales ops, as we called them, were so intertwined. And we had taken care of this part, but the sales ops piece is something we needed to work through more with.
Yeah. Listening to you talk to, there's something about the evolution of, for all that we've done in digital, right? We're, call it maybe 20 to 25 years in.
Yeah.
For businesses that have been around for 100 years. And so there's well-established processes, and there's well-established ways of doing business. And, while we think e-commerce is mature, we're still reasonably new at this. And it's been so disruptive in so many different ways. I mean, one of the things that we're starting to be conscious of too, I think, is how it is relating to what used to be relationship-driven businesses, where we're so dependent on how we talk to one another, how we engage, knowing each other, and having that as the channel and ways in which we sell and communicate. I guess in your observation, how have you done on that in terms of maintaining the human side of the relationship while also building a much more digitized business?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. When you mention it, it reminds me of something real quick. I mean, we were in a kind of joint sales and marketing sales ops leadership kickoff, and I remember my boss had a sales stood up, and his slides said simply, "Relationships matter."
Mm-hmm.
And then he went through it and he said, but they're going to be really different, right? And so your relationship with someone's going to matter. To your point, the human side. So, our sales rep relationship with, if a field sales with a field seller or headquarter to headquarter sale, they all still matter, because there's still a trust factor that will not go away. And there's a human factor to trust.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you think about the same thing, there's the digital factor to trust as well, right? And so the information that we put on a product detail page, the information we put on a marketing asset, all of that needs to be just as trustworthy in a digital way. If we send them an email, if we want to help them troubleshoot a paper jam, if we want to help them troubleshoot cleaning data, or various different ways, all of those relationships matter. So I think externally, what it really did was really help us understand which pieces were really core to gaining the trust, and which pieces were just essential to kind of keeping the lights going on more on that transactional. And a lot of the digital really took care of the transactional. The internal thing, James said, was probably the most surprising to me, was how much it created the need for this faster collaboration, right? So we weren't using agile methodologies or anything, but immediately, we get a phone call, they didn't get their shipment. Oh, wait, our reseller put a really bad price out there. Now everyone's arguing why they matched it or something, right? And you didn't have, okay, let me think about it. Let me get everybody organized. Let me get a steering committee together. Let me get a couple of weeks. I'll put a response, right? It's like, I got to go find somebody, and in 3 minutes, I got to go find an answer. But it was also very energizing, right? When you explain to people, like, we can just get things done quickly with the knowledge. But that changed a lot of internal relationships as well, of different groups that probably didn't talk as fast as they used to, especially if I think through kind of now from 8 years ago. So that's how I'd say kind of the human piece has kind of evolved.
Yeah, you use a really important word there around trust, because that's certainly been, between a sales rep and the customer, has always been that relationship of, do we trust, can you trust, right, that I'm going to stand behind the service and product that I'm offering. Fascinating to hear about how you can take that same word and then bring it back through the company's digital presentation of itself, and understand what can be digitized and what needs to stay with the humans. Must be a fascinating sociological experiment as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Jim, it's interesting you said too, and I think the trust also extends from the sales team to the digital organization, right? Because you've also got to, I've heard cases of where these aren't aligned, and Shalin, you guys did a good job aligning those channels going to market, where the sales team is not supportive of the B2B e-commerce effort, regardless of whether it's selling to Amazon or other pure plays or selling direct. That can kill an effort, a collaborative effort. In other words, sales teams, I've heard cases where the sales team's working actively against e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. Call me. I'll give you a better price or whatever.
Right.
You see, that trust needs to extend the other way. And I love the way you guys structured it, where you're in the sales organization. It takes real leadership, I think, from your sales organization to evolve, right? To think that this digital can be enabling. And I love that example you gave just a minute ago. That's fantastic. So kudos to GP on that. So you guys have ended up with GP has ended up with a lot of these different selling channels. Mm-hmm. We alluded to this a little earlier. You've got your large distributors, your mid-sized distributors, your Cisco's, your Henry Scheins, and whoever, all these different. Yeah. And you alluded to this. You've got some value that you've learned and pulled from your own e-commerce. Mm-hmm. How do you, on a consistent basis, help them? Because a lot of companies don't realize that as you're learning for your own e-com and your own digital efforts, you can actually then feed that to these channels and help them become better, right? You alluded to this earlier. Let's go a layer down on that. What are some of the specific things you did there?
Yeah, so a couple of ones, so we talked a little bit, some of the pure play resellers. You mentioned Zorro in the introduction as an example, right? One of the things we did is we would look at our promotions and our conversions and our return on our marketing investment, for lack of a better word. How many sales did we get for the digital ad dollars we put out? And then we use those as benchmarks to then take that to our customers. So if we said, hey, look, we think we can invest, X thousands of dollars and get X thousands in return with you. Are you in? Does that make sense to you? Do you have a program like that? So that was one that was actually super helpful. And then if we got into the program, we would say, but here's what we learned that worked, right? And so sometimes we would say, look, if they're off your site, don't show my product. When they're on your site, show my product. When they're off their product, show them who they are in their business. And so we could use a lot of those data points. Another thing that became super helpful was, we spent a lot of time working on what is the right wording for search. And the simple example was, and it sounds pedantic now, right? But it's a journey. Bath tissue, nobody's typing in bath tissue. Everybody types in toilet paper, right? So in our data, it said toilet paper, but in all the resellers' data, it was still saying bath tissue. And everyone would type in toilet paper. So, and we would show them the differences, and we had, and they would go, oh, right. And so, that would help their whole category, not just us sometimes.
You just, by the way, Shalin, you just explained the great toilet paper crisis.
Yeah,
as soon as you told them that, everyone started typing in,
They just type in toilet paper everywhere. I got to change that.
And then you fulfilled the demand and all the toilet paper's gone. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all gone. Yeah. So, and I have no inside way of getting toilet paper, I'll admit. So, but that was probably the search ones, the conversions, and that were some of the ones. And then one of the other things that we would test is sometimes we'd start testing whether or not certain messages, certain products, or certain sales scripts might work as well. So when we're doing some new product innovations, I remember we just recently launched a pretty neat hygienic non-touchless cutlery system. And it was new, and we had a lot of different ideas on how to maybe go sell it. Well, we just tested which words worked, what sales scripts worked, what types of customers actually got interested. And then we use those learnings to then go to the resellers and say, hey, here are the types of accounts we want to target. Here's the language we should be using. Here's a value prop that worked. And that became pretty powerful, right? That we could even take the online, 100% online self-serve and impact the offline world as well, and kind of the hybrid world. So that's just some of how we learned some of those learnings.
That's fantastic. And I think that's part of also how you probably message to the channels, right? When you alluded to this earlier, when you go out to the distributors, to the retailers you're selling to, showing them. Did you find that the retailers and resellers over your 10 years there, were they becoming more receptive to those messages? Were they, was that resonating with them more, that they understand that you can actually add value from your own e-commerce efforts? Was that So did you see kind of more acceptance of your own sort of e-commerce channels over time?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, early on, to your point, Brian, they were like, yeah, they kind of did the head nod, but I think it was when they left the room, they were like, yeah, whatever. But it got to the point, more recently where the resellers are coming back and saying, here's my program. I can give you this search boost or this or that or that. Here's how much money, and here's the return we think you're going to get. And I'm like, wow, we used to do the other way. So yeah, I mean, I definitely saw a pretty big change in kind of
Right.
the destination and the thinking that way.
That's
So,
great. That's great. So we've talked a lot about some of your traditional distribution channels, how they've digitized. And, anytime we talk about e-commerce evolution, we have to talk about the company that's responsible for 50% of US e-commerce. It's
right,
insane if
right.
you think about it, right? And by the way, it's not just consumer now; it's also B2B.
Yeah.
I'm talking about Amazon, of course, and they're the dominant player in consumer. They're anticipated to be $52 billion in B2B transactions within 3 or 4 years. RBC Capital Markets came out with a report on that. I mean, the B2B side of that business is incredible. It's now the fastest growing part of Amazon. So, and that's a lot of the work that we do at my firm in SIBA. But tell us about how you guys dealt with that. What were the aspects of conflict? How did you approach Amazon? What was your strategy? There's multiple ways to think about Amazon as a manufacturer. What was your strategy, and how did that evolve over your time working with them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it evolves weekly, but is one way. But I would say the overarching kind of strategy is we didn't look at them as a traditional reseller, and we took the framework and said, look, they are a technology services partner, and so if we were to go ask the world, what are all the technical e-commerce things that maybe we can't go do ourselves or that we think the industry might need, can they go do those? And so the reason that was helpful for us, Brian, is, to your point, we looked at them as a partner, we looked at them as an innovator, we looked at them as a competitor, right? And we looked at them as a vendor as well, because we were part of obviously Amazon Marketing Services where we're buying media,
Mm.
right? And so we looked at them as the entire ecosystem. And which was painful, but it was, I think it had some merits to it. I think the thing we always knew is if we came up with ideas that would help their category grow, then we just had to do our part to make sure we're growing with that part of their category, and we had to do it in a way that made sure that the profit was going to kind of make sense for both of us. But we said no as well. I mean, our top two brands in Pro, we did not directly sell into Amazon. We said no. We didn't feel like they met our criteria and requirements of what's required in the market for those types of products, given their premium nature and things that kind of go around it. But yeah, we were worried about what they're going to do in private labels. So we would always go, okay, if we do this, here's the data. What are they going to do with that data? Oh, if they do that, what are we going to do? And we'd have to, I hate to use it, we'd have to game it out. I mean, a little bit just to make sure that we knew what we were managing. But that was kind of our strategy. The other part that was super helpful was what we had mentioned, which is because we didn't think of them as a traditional kind of distributor, we tried very hard to not use all of our processes for everybody else force fit onto them. So what we did hard is we, said, here's our policies and principles, but we're going to update our processes with Amazon. We're going to force them to help us innovate some things that might help us. And so that's kind of how we thought about them. And so, it's been a successful business. I think we've done lots of partnerships. We had, dozens and dozens of failed experiments, to say the least. But a couple that worked, right? And so the couple that worked really well. And so that's kind of how we've thought about them so far.
Yeah, it's interesting that there's a lot of nuggets in what you just said, and I think you got to realize with Amazon it is different than maybe your other channels that you traditionally sold to, and the approach you took is interesting, where you broke it down really on a product by product basis, right? I mean, that's what you're saying: product line, brand, specific product. Does it make sense on Amazon? Doesn't it? That kind of thing. So, I think that's a wise approach. And how did your other channels react when you were selling on Amazon? How did you manage that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So when we first went on there, I mean, they got very up in arms, to say the least. Primarily for two reasons. One, they were balking about price, which is no surprise, and the other one was some of these premium products where they're just long sales cycles, and they're like, wait a minute, we have all these agreements in place. And so but over time we put in some specific processes. I mean, we put in a minimum advertised price policy as an example, and a few others that really showed to the partners, look, here's what you can do really well, and that's what we want to do with you, right? And so if you have these complex set of services that Amazon Business doesn't have, then we want to use those. But here's some things that they have that you don't, and we would actually show them, look, we'll be more profitable together if we do these things versus that. And so it goes back to the trust that we were talking about with Jamus. It was not easy, and the other part is it's never ending. I think you just kind of, once you get the mentality of they're just going to get upset. And the one thing that was helpful though is we would always look at the numbers and go, are they losing a lot of share, or are they losing a lot of profit we believe in? Is that why they're complaining? Then let's solve that problem. And are they just using Amazon as an excuse? And so that helped quite a bit actually. And we wouldn't tell the customer that, obviously, that they're using Amazon excuse. But that was actually super helpful. Like we had, our sharp sales ops team would say, this is their real problem. Okay, let's solve that one. We don't need to solve the Amazon thing.
Well, and the other thing you said in there, which was really cool, was, and that was what alludes back to what I was sharing at the beginning, that, understanding the value that each company, each reseller provides, right? So what does Amazon do differently than, say, some of your other resellers? Look, I think Amazon, in my opinion, is a great equalizer in the sense that they are forcing everyone to up their game, including all your distribution and resale channels, with digital, with e-commerce, with making sure they understand the value they're adding to that ultimate customer. And that's why I say anybody in this world now has to start with that end customer. And are you doing the best job for that customer? Whether you're making the product and selling to somebody else, or whether you're reselling the product, it's that, making sure you're adding value. Yeah. So good stuff, guys. So this is a great discussion. So I asked this question of everybody that joins the virtual book tour. And Jamus, I'm going to ask it to you again. So maybe you put a different spin on your last answer. But Shalin, so, I talk to companies who have never started their digital transformation journey. They're just getting going in e-commerce. 50% of B2B companies don't have an e-commerce site, believe it or not, still. So what advice would you give to a CEO of a company that's just starting its digital transformation journey now that you've been down the path, you've worked with the leadership? What advice would you give?
So I think the advice I would give would be very clear on what your business plan strategy is, whether it's speed to delivery of a customer, whether it's cost efficiency, it's acquisition of customers, or innovation. Whatever that overarching business goal has to be crystal clear, because that to me is the guiding principle for what the digital transformation needs to be. Because I think the reason I give that advice is otherwise I think everyone just says go digital, and you don't know what to do with it. You know why you're going, and it's like, well, yeah, like, okay, I turned my paper into a Microsoft OneNote. I went digital, and you're like, well, that doesn't solve the business problem, right? Maybe it does if it's efficient working, but that I think is a big advice I'd give, because I also think that forces you to go and understand what we talked about, the processes. Don't digitize analog processes. Come up with the new ways of working and how that world works. That'd be the thing I'd give them the most advice on.
Awesome. What about you, Jamus?
Well, I'll try and be consistent with my previous answer. And the good news is Shalin left an opening for me to do that.
There you go.
There was something you said a few minutes ago, which I actually took a note on too, which is we did dozens and dozens of things wrong and a few things were right. And that just speaks so well to the attitude of the business around let's test, let's learn, let's be comfortable failing, let's be comfortable as long as we're failing quickly and learning from it. And as we talked before, at least in our view, so much of what we're doing in a young industry, and 20 years in, it's still a young industry, is about learning. And so generally when I speak with digital leaders, I often encourage them to get really comfortable with the expression of, I don't know, what do you think? Because we're all learning along the way, and sort of having the right culture of test, learn, if something quote unquote fails, in fact, that's just the way we pay tuition now. So having that attitude that we pay to learn, right? And we pay to learn through trial and error is a wonderful thing. And being very comfortable admitting that we're all going to get a lot of things wrong on the way to getting it right.
That is, I love that. And, it's funny. You honed it on the testing, and Shalin, I think, said that, talked about, failing and learning. I mean, that's at the core of Amazon's,
Mhm.
approach to business. And I work and talk a lot with the Amazon teams, particularly the Amazon business team. And I mean, they actually, at almost 1 million employees, they still maintain that approach. It's the customer first, but it's also, let's try things and fail. And they view failing as a win.
Right.
When they fail, that's successsuced because they
Mhm.
learned something. Even if you look at the history of Amazon business, I mean, their first iteration was Amazon Supply. It didn't work. They rebooted, they learned, and they're doing things differently, and they're succeeding. So great advice, guys, from both of you. And I want to thank both of you for joining us on this.
Yeah.
This has been a fantastic discussion. And you guys are giving some great advice for our listeners. So thank you for that. So you all met me, Brian. Here's my contact information. My cell phone number's there, and the more information about the book on billiondollarb2b ecommerce.com. Be happy to hear from you. So please reach out. Shalin's information is here, is LinkedIn, and then Jamus as well. So I want to thank my guests again today very much. It's been a great conversation today. Our next session is session 6, leveraging digital marketing with big ass fans. If you've ever gone into a large volume space, like an arena or an airport, you looked up and saw a 30-foot wingspan fan, that's likely a big ass fan. It's an awesome company with great products, and I'm super excited to have Dan Godowski as my next guest on session 6. All of our sessions going forward will air at 8 a.m. And then they'll be available on demand. That's Eastern Standard Time. We have Creating a Successful Online User Experience with Cardinal Health coming September 2nd, and Our Digital Future with Illumina on September 16th. More information on the books available on the website, and you can email myself or Meg Purcell. So thank you all for joining. Good luck on your digital transformation journey, and I hope to see you as a digitally mature company really soon. Thank you so much.